The Providence Municipal Court fell into stunned silence as Judge Frank Caprio slowly removed his reading glasses, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he processed the legal documents spread before him. The 77-year-old jurist, renowned for his decades of courtroom authority and television fame, had just encountered something that challenged everything he thought he understood about the young attorney standing confidently before his bench. Moments earlier, Caprio had been attempting to intimidate Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett during what he assumed would be a routine procedural hearing. His condescending tone and dismissive attitude had been on full display as he questioned her legal credentials and suggested she was merely a political figurehead, lacking substantive legal knowledge. The packed courtroom had watched in uncomfortable silence as the respected judge appeared to let personal bias cloud his professional judgment. Then, Crockett presented her response. The comprehensive legal brief she placed before the court contained constitutional analysis so sophisticated and precedent citations so precisely targeted that even Caprio's most experienced clerks began exchanging glances of recognition. This was not the work of a novice politician playing at being a lawyer. This was the product of a legal mind operating at the highest levels of constitutional scholarship. The transformation in Caprio's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. The confident authority that had characterized his earlier statements gave way to careful consideration, as he realized he had significantly underestimated his opponent. What happened next would not only force the veteran judge to acknowledge his error, but would demonstrate why assuming incompetence based on age or political status represents one of the most dangerous mistakes any legal professional can make. Before we explore this remarkable confrontation between judicial experience and legal brilliance, make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you never miss these compelling stories of justice, respect, and the power of preparation in our legal system. Judge Frank Caprio had built his reputation over nearly 5 decades on the bench, becoming one of America's most recognizable judicial figures through his television show, Court in Providence, and his approach to municipal court proceedings. His Italian-American background and Providence roots had shaped his judicial philosophy, emphasizing common sense, community values, and practical solutions to everyday legal problems. Throughout his career, Caprio had prided himself on his ability to read people quickly and accurately assess their character and capabilities. The judge's television fame had brought him national recognition, with millions of viewers appreciating his blend of tough love and compassionate justice. His courtroom had become a destination for those seeking fair treatment and understanding, particularly for working-class individuals facing financial hardships or minor legal infractions. Caprio's reputation for being both stern and fair had made him a beloved figure in Rhode Island and beyond. However, success and recognition had perhaps created certain assumptions in Caprio's approach to younger attorneys and politicians. His decades of experience had taught him to quickly categorize legal professionals based on their presentation, background, and apparent expertise. This skill had served him well throughout most of his career, allowing him to efficiently manage his courtroom and provide appropriate guidance to attorneys of varying skill levels. Jasmine Crockett represented a completely different legal trajectory. Her path to Congress had been built upon an exceptional foundation of legal scholarship and practical courtroom experience that few of her political contemporaries could match. Born in Missouri and educated at the University of Houston Law Center, Crockett had distinguished herself early in her legal career through her mastery of civil rights law and constitutional interpretation. Her legal practice in Dallas had focused on complex civil rights cases, employment discrimination litigation, and constitutional challenges that required sophisticated understanding of federal law and Supreme Court precedent. Before entering politics, Crockett had successfully argued cases involving voting rights, criminal justice reform, and civil liberties that demonstrated her ability to navigate the most challenging areas of constitutional law. What made Crockett particularly formidable was her combination of academic excellence and practical courtroom experience. She had not merely studied law, she had practiced it at the highest levels, taking on cases that required both intellectual rigor and strategic thinking. Her transition into politics had been motivated by a desire to create systemic change, but her legal skills remained as sharp as ever. The case that brought these two legal figures together involved a complex constitutional question regarding federal oversight of state election procedures. The matter had originated in Rhode Island but had implications for federal election law that extended far beyond state boundaries. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee and someone with extensive experience in voting rights litigation, Crockett had been asked to participate in the proceedings as an expert witness and legal consultant. The legal issues at stake were sophisticated, involving the intersection of state sovereignty, federal constitutional requirements, and practical election administration. The case required deep knowledge of Supreme Court precedent dating back to the Civil Rights era, as well as understanding of more recent decisions affecting voting procedures and federal oversight authority. Caprio had assumed that Crockett's participation would be primarily ceremonial, expecting her to defer to local counsel and limit her involvement to brief political statements. This assumption was based on his experience with other politicians who had appeared in legal proceedings primarily for publicity purposes rather than substantive legal contribution. The judge's preparation for the hearing had focused on the procedural aspects and the local attorneys involved in the case. He had reviewed Crockett's political background, but had not thoroughly examined her legal credentials or her extensive experience in constitutional litigation. This oversight would prove to be a significant miscalculation. The courtroom was packed with local attorneys, law students, and members of the media who had come to observe the proceedings. Many were familiar with Caprio's reputation and television persona, while others were curious about how a sitting Congresswoman would handle complex legal arguments in a formal judicial setting. The stage was set for a confrontation between two very different approaches to law and justice: Caprio's practical, experience-based judicial philosophy and Crockett's scholarly, constitution-focused legal methodology. Neither participant fully understood what they were about to encounter. The hearing began routinely as Judge Caprio called the session to order and reviewed the procedural requirements for the constitutional challenge before his court. His demeanor was professional, but carried the subtle authority that comes from decades of judicial experience and the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most knowledgeable legal mind in his courtroom. As the preliminary matters were addressed, Caprio's attention turned to Congresswoman Crockett, who was seated at the counsel table with a substantial collection of legal documents and constitutional law texts. Rather than showing the deference that the judge typically received from attorneys in his courtroom, Crockett was actively reviewing case citations and making notes with the focused intensity of someone preparing for sophisticated legal argument. When Caprio called for opening statements regarding the constitutional issues at stake, he addressed Crockett with a tone that was polite but clearly condescending. Congresswoman Crockett, while we appreciate your interest in this matter, I hope you understand that constitutional law requires very specific legal knowledge and courtroom experience that may be different from the political arena in which you normally operate. The statement drew uncomfortable glances from the experienced attorneys present, who recognized that Caprio was making assumptions about Crockett's legal capabilities based on her political position rather than her actual qualifications. Several local practitioners who were familiar with her legal background shifted uneasily in their seats, anticipating that the judge might be underestimating his opponent. Crockett responded with professional courtesy but unmistakable confidence. Your Honor, I appreciate the court's concern for proper legal procedure. I am prepared to address the constitutional issues in this case with the same rigor and attention to precedent that this matter requires. Caprio's response revealed the depth of his misconceptions about her background. Well, Congresswoman, constitutional interpretation is not something that can be learned through political experience. It requires years of legal study and practical application. I hope you have consulted with qualified constitutional attorneys in preparing your position. The condescending tone was unmistakable, and the packed courtroom began to recognize that Judge Caprio was treating a sitting member of the House Judiciary Committee as if she were a novice political figure without legal training. The assumption was not only professionally inappropriate, but factually incorrect in ways that would soon become apparent. Crockett maintained her composure, despite the obvious slight to her professional credentials. Your Honor, I am prepared to present constitutional analysis based on relevant Supreme Court precedent and scholarly interpretation. If the court would permit, I would like to address the specific legal issues raised by this case. Rather than allowing her to proceed immediately, Caprio continued his patronizing approach. Congresswoman, before we move forward, I want to ensure that you understand the complexity of the constitutional questions involved. These matters involve intricate legal principles that require extensive study of Supreme Court decisions and constitutional interpretation. Are you certain you are prepared to engage with these issues at the appropriate level of legal sophistication? The question was clearly intended to intimidate Crockett into deferring to other counsel or limiting her participation to political commentary rather than legal argument. Caprio's approach suggested that he viewed her as a political figure attempting to operate outside her area of expertise rather than a qualified attorney with relevant experience. Crockett's response was measured but firm. Your Honor, I have spent considerable time preparing for this hearing and am confident in my ability to address the constitutional questions before this court. If I may proceed with my analysis of the relevant case law and constitutional principles. Instead of granting her request, Caprio decided to test what he assumed was her limited legal knowledge by asking specific questions about constitutional interpretation. Congresswoman, can you explain to this court how the Supremacy Clause interacts with the 10th Amendment in cases involving federal oversight of state election procedures? The question was designed to expose what Caprio assumed would be Crockett's superficial understanding of constitutional law. He expected either a vague political response or an admission that she needed to consult with more experienced counsel. What he received instead was a comprehensive legal analysis that demonstrated mastery of constitutional principles at the highest level. Crockett began her response by citing specific constitutional text, then proceeded to analyze relevant Supreme Court decisions chronologically, explaining how judicial interpretation had evolved over time. She referenced specific cases by name, cited particular justices' opinions, and explained the constitutional reasoning behind key decisions with the precision of a constitutional law professor. As her analysis continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift noticeably. The local attorneys who had initially appeared sympathetic to Caprio's skepticism began leaning forward with obvious interest and respect. Court clerks stopped their routine paperwork to listen more carefully. Even Caprio himself began to realize that his initial assessment had been seriously flawed. Crockett's presentation included references to recent circuit court decisions that most practitioners would not have encountered, analysis of constitutional interpretation methodologies that demonstrated sophisticated legal training, and practical applications of constitutional principles that revealed extensive courtroom experience. Her response was not merely academically correct, but strategically comprehensive in ways that addressed every aspect of the complex legal question Caprio had posed. When she concluded her initial response, the courtroom was noticeably quiet. Caprio found himself in the unfamiliar position of having asked a question designed to expose ignorance, and instead receiving a legal analysis that surpassed his own understanding of the constitutional issues involved. Rather than acknowledging his error immediately, Caprio attempted to maintain his position by asking additional technical questions about specific cases and constitutional interpretation principles. Each subsequent question only served to further demonstrate Crockett's exceptional legal knowledge and his own miscalculation in underestimating her capabilities. The turning point in the hearing came when Judge Caprio, still attempting to challenge what he incorrectly perceived as Crockett's limited legal knowledge, asked her to address a particularly complex constitutional question involving the interaction between federal civil rights enforcement and state sovereignty principles. The question was designed to be intimidating and required knowledge of obscure Supreme Court precedent and sophisticated constitutional theory. Crockett's response transformed the entire dynamic of the courtroom proceeding. Rather than providing a simple answer to Caprio's question, She delivered a comprehensive constitutional analysis that demonstrated not only her mastery of the specific legal issues, but her understanding of the broader constitutional framework governing federal-state relations in election law. She began by placing the question in historical context, referencing the constitutional debates during the founding era, and explaining how concerns about federal overreach and state autonomy had shaped the constitutional text.
Her analysis included specific references to Federalist Papers arguments and early Supreme Court decisions that established fundamental principles of constitutional interpretation. Moving forward chronologically, Crockett explained how civil rights
legislation and Supreme Court decisions had modified the original constitutional balance, particularly in the context of voting rights and election procedures. She cited specific cases by name, explained the constitutional reasoning behind key decisions, and demonstrated understanding of how different judicial philosophies had influenced constitutional interpretation over time. Her analysis included references to recent Supreme Court decisions that had refined the balance between federal oversight and state authority, including cases that had been decided within the previous 2 years and represented the current state of constitutional law. She explained how these decisions affected the specific legal questions at issue in the Rhode Island case, providing practical guidance for how constitutional principles should be applied to the facts before the court. As Crockett continued her presentation, it became increasingly clear to everyone in the courtroom that Judge Caprio had encountered a legal mind operating at a level far beyond what he had anticipated. The local attorneys present began recognizing that they were witnessing exceptional constitutional scholarship being presented by someone whose legal credentials had been unfairly dismissed based on her political position. The comprehensive nature of Crockett's legal analysis extended beyond mere citation of cases and constitutional text. She demonstrated understanding of the practical implications of different constitutional interpretations, the policy considerations that influenced judicial decision-making, and the strategic litigation approaches that had shaped civil rights law over several decades. When she addressed the specific procedural questions that had initiated the Rhode Island case, Crockett provided analysis that was both legally sophisticated and practically applicable. She explained how federal oversight requirements could be implemented in ways that respected state sovereignty while ensuring constitutional compliance, demonstrating understanding of both legal theory and administrative reality. Judge Caprio found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position as Crockett's presentation continued. His initial assumptions about her legal capabilities had been thoroughly disproven, and his condescending approach now appeared professionally inappropriate and personally embarrassing. The packed courtroom was witnessing a veteran judge being educated about constitutional law by someone he had attempted to intimidate and dismiss. The climax of the confrontation came when Crockett referenced a recent law review article that she had authored on federal election oversight, published in a prestigious constitutional law journal, and cited by federal courts in subsequent decisions. The article demonstrated not only her practical legal experience, but her recognition as a scholarly authority on the exact constitutional questions that Judge Caprio had assumed she was unqualified to address. As she quoted from her own published legal scholarship explaining how her research had influenced federal court decisions and congressional legislation, the transformation in courtroom atmosphere was complete. Judge Caprio sat silent behind his bench, clearly recognizing that his initial approach had been based on fundamental misconceptions about Crockett's qualifications and expertise. The local attorneys present began exchanging glances that reflected both professional admiration for Crockett's legal analysis and uncomfortable recognition that a respected judge had allowed personal bias to cloud his professional judgment. Court personnel who had initially appeared sympathetic to Caprio's skepticism now seemed embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. When Crockett concluded her comprehensive constitutional analysis by directly addressing the specific legal questions that had initiated the Rhode Island proceedings, she provided clear, practical guidance that demonstrated both theoretical understanding and strategic litigation experience. Her recommendations were legally sound, constitutionally grounded, and practically implementable. Judge Caprio was forced to acknowledge that the legal analysis he had just received was among the most sophisticated constitutional presentations he had encountered during his decades on the bench. His response marked a complete reversal from his earlier condescending tone. "Congresswoman Crockett, I must acknowledge that your analysis of these constitutional issues has been exceptionally thorough and demonstrates considerable legal expertise. I apologize if my earlier comments suggested any lack of confidence in your legal qualifications. Your presentation has been both enlightening and professionally impressive." The formal apology, delivered before a packed courtroom and recorded by court reporters, represented a significant moment of professional humility. For a judge accustomed to being the final authority on legal questions, the acknowledgement was particularly meaningful because it came from someone whose judicial experience and television fame had made him one of the most recognizable legal figures in the country. Crockett accepted the apology with professional grace, thanking Judge Caprio for his consideration and expressing appreciation for the opportunity to address the constitutional questions before the court. Her response demonstrated the same dignity and professionalism that had characterized her legal presentation, avoiding any appearance of triumph or vindication despite the dramatic reversal in courtroom dynamics. The hearing concluded with Judge Caprio incorporating Crockett's constitutional analysis into his ruling on the procedural questions, acknowledging her legal scholarship and practical recommendations in his formal written decision. The ruling would later be cited by other federal courts as an example of sophisticated constitutional analysis applied to complex federal-state jurisdictional issues. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation between Judge Frank Caprio and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett extended far beyond the confines of the Providence Municipal Court. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, word of the exchange had spread throughout legal communities in Rhode Island and beyond, generating discussions about judicial assumptions, professional respect, and the importance of thorough preparation before making assessments about opposing counsel's capabilities. Legal observers who had attended the hearing began sharing accounts of Crockett's exceptional constitutional analysis and Caprio's gracious acknowledgement of his initial misjudgment. The story resonated particularly strongly among younger attorneys and attorneys of color who had faced similar assumptions about their capabilities based on their appearance, age, or non-traditional career paths. Court reporters and legal journalists documented the exchange as an example of how even experienced judicial officers can benefit from approaching each case and each attorney with appropriate professional respect, rather than relying on assumptions based on political position or other non-legal factors. The incident became a case study in legal education programs focused on courtroom professionalism and judicial conduct. Judge Caprio's response to the situation demonstrated the wisdom and humility that had made him respected throughout his judicial career. Rather than attempting to minimize the significance of his error or deflect responsibility for his initial approach, he used the experience as an opportunity for professional growth and public education about the dangers of making assumptions about legal professionals based on limited information. In subsequent interviews and public appearances, Caprio acknowledged that the exchange with Crockett had reminded him of the importance of maintaining judicial neutrality and professional respect, regardless of personal assumptions about the attorneys appearing before his court. His willingness to discuss the incident openly and acknowledge his mistake enhanced rather than diminished his reputation for integrity and fairness. The judge also used the experience to modify his approach to other cases involving attorneys with non-traditional backgrounds or political positions. Court personnel noted that Caprio became more deliberate about reviewing the legal credentials and professional background of attorneys appearing before his court, ensuring that his interactions were based on actual qualifications rather than assumptions or first impressions. For Congresswoman Crockett, the incident provided additional evidence of her exceptional legal capabilities while demonstrating her ability to maintain professional dignity under challenging circumstances. The exchange reinforced her reputation among legal colleagues as someone who combined political effectiveness with substantive legal expertise, a relatively rare combination in contemporary politics. Legal scholars who reviewed transcripts of Crockett's constitutional analysis noted the sophisticated level of her legal reasoning and her comprehensive understanding of both historical constitutional principles and contemporary legal developments. Several law review articles referenced her presentation as an example of effective constitutional advocacy and practical application of legal scholarship to complex jurisdictional questions. The incident also highlighted broader questions about assumptions made regarding the legal capabilities of elected officials. While many politicians have legal backgrounds, relatively few possess the combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience that Crockett demonstrated during the Rhode Island proceedings. Her performance illustrated the difference between political figures who happen to have law degrees and those who remain active legal practitioners and constitutional scholars. Law schools began incorporating the exchange into courses on courtroom, advocacy and professional responsibility, using it to illustrate both the importance of thorough preparation and the dangers of allowing personal bias or assumptions to influence professional interactions. The case study proved particularly effective in demonstrating how quickly courtroom dynamics can shift when initial assumptions prove incorrect. The legal brief that Crockett had prepared for the Rhode Island case became a model document studied by constitutional law students and practicing attorneys, specializing in federal election oversight. The comprehensive nature of her legal research and the strategic presentation of constitutional arguments demonstrated advanced techniques in legal writing and appellate advocacy. Federal courts in other jurisdictions began citing both Crockett's legal analysis and Judge Caprio's subsequent ruling in cases involving similar constitutional questions about federal-state jurisdiction in election law. The scholarly quality of her constitutional interpretation contributed to the development of legal precedent that would influence future cases involving federal oversight of state election procedures. Professional organizations representing attorneys of color noted the incident as an example of how competence and preparation can overcome initial skepticism or bias, while also highlighting the additional burden placed on minority professionals to prove their qualifications in ways that their white colleagues may not experience. The Rhode Island Bar Association used the incident as the basis for continuing legal education programs focused on unconscious bias in legal proceedings and the importance of maintaining professional respect for all attorneys regardless of their background, appearance, or political affiliation. These programs proved popular among both experienced practitioners and newer attorneys seeking to understand best practices for courtroom professionalism. Judge Caprio's television show incorporated discussions about the importance of avoiding assumptions and maintaining professional respect as ongoing themes in subsequent episodes. His willingness to address the incident publicly and acknowledge the lessons learned demonstrated the kind of professional growth that enhanced his educational impact beyond his courtroom. The confrontation also sparked broader discussions within legal education about the importance of teaching law students to expect and prepare for situations where their qualifications or expertise might be questioned based on factors unrelated to their legal knowledge or professional experience. This proved particularly relevant for students from underrepresented backgrounds or those planning non-traditional legal careers. Congressional colleagues who had worked with Crockett on Judiciary Committee matters noted that the Rhode Island incident provided additional evidence of her exceptional legal preparation and substantive policy expertise. The recognition enhanced her influence within House Democratic leadership and increased requests for her participation in complex constitutional matters. Legal commentators observed that the exchange demonstrated the continuing evolution of American legal practice, where traditional assumptions about authority and expertise are increasingly challenged by diverse legal professionals who bring different perspectives and experiences to constitutional interpretation and courtroom advocacy. The incident became part of the broader narrative about Crockett's legal and political career, illustrating how her combination of scholarly expertise and practical experience positioned her as a unique figure in contemporary politics. Unlike many elected officials who rely primarily on staff support for legal analysis, Crockett demonstrated the ability to engage personally with the most complex constitutional questions facing the nation. For viewers examining this confrontation between judicial experience and legal scholarship, The lessons extend far beyond the specific constitutional questions addressed during the Rhode Island hearing. The exchange illustrates fundamental principles about professional respect, the dangers of assumptions based on limited information, and the importance of thorough preparation in any professional encounter. The transformation of Judge Caprio from skeptical questioner to respectful colleague demonstrates how wisdom and professional growth can occur at any stage of a career, when individuals remain open to new information and willing to acknowledge when their initial assumptions prove incorrect. His response to the situation provided a model for how professional mistakes can be addressed with integrity and humility. Crockett's performance throughout the confrontation illustrated how competence, preparation, and professional dignity can overcome initial skepticism and transform challenging situations into opportunities for education and mutual respect. Her approach demonstrated that responding to disrespect with excellence, rather than anger, often produces more positive long-term outcomes. The broader implications of this confrontation continue to influence legal education, judicial training, and professional development programs throughout the American legal system. The incident serves as a reminder that expertise and wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources, and that maintaining professional respect for all colleagues ultimately strengthens the entire legal profession. Contemporary legal practice, increasingly, requires practitioners to work effectively with colleagues from diverse backgrounds, career paths, and areas of expertise. The Rhode Island exchange between Caprio and Crockett provides a valuable example of how professional relationships can be strengthened rather than damaged when initial misunderstandings are addressed with honesty, respect, and commitment to learning from experience. What aspects of this legal confrontation resonate most strongly with your own professional experiences or observations about assumptions and expertise in workplace settings? Have you encountered situations where initial impressions proved incorrect, and how were those misunderstandings resolved? Share your thoughts about maintaining professional respect and avoiding assumptions based on limited information, and remember to subscribe for more stories about justice, professional excellence, and the power of preparation in overcoming initial skepticism through demonstrated competence and dignity.